think we'll get started. There may be a few more people coming in, but I wanted to give everybody a little introduction to our speakers today and the program that they were involved with. So Adams State has an agreement with the Bureau of Land Management for summer internships. These are paid internships. The students work full-time during the summer. And as part of that, they also complete a project in conjunction with their supervisors at the BLM, but also they have a faculty advisor here at Adams State, and they earn course credit for that. And so this past summer, we had 3 student interns, Mianna Maestas, Edgar Pinedo-Escobedo, and John Whitinger. Mianna did a project with wetlands. She was a wetlands intern. Edgar was an intern primarily with the solar project, but he did a side project that had to do with analytical chemistry that he'll tell you about. And John was a GIS intern this summer. Next summer is probably our last year for the internship, unless we can reestablish that agreement. The BLM pays the students, and so we need to reapply for that agreement in order to continue this activity. But Mianna's going to talk first about her project, and then Edgar, and then John. And what I thought we could do is each one of them is going to take about 12 to 15 minutes. So if you could hold your questions till the very end, we'll let them get all the way through their presentations, and then we'll take questions. Okay, Mianna?
Hi, my name is Mianna Maestas, and she pretty much introduced me the rest of it. My project was on the water quality of the Blanca wetlands. With that said, what is water quality? Water quality is a condition of water describing chemical, physical, and biological characteristics with respect to a particular purpose or sustaining a particular species. Why this matters to the Blanca wetlands? It influences the diversity and abundance of macroinvertebrates. I don't know if you can see this picture very well, but it shows the macros on the side of the different playas. The purpose to this experiment was to characterize the site, determine if there is high salt and salinity present within each of the playas, determine if there is seasonal variability and high variability, and determine if EPA standards are above or below the quality of each of the playas. When it comes to the history and characteristics of the Blanca wetlands, it encompasses over 122,000 acres and supports over 200 basins of both marshes, or basins and marshes. So right here is where the Blanca wetlands is. It also shows you where it was once engulfed in 15 inches of water. It then dried and became the dry lake. There was a restoration project made by the Bureau of Land Management and its partners. So with that, the restoration project was to include having productive playa habitat with high density of water birds, macroinvertebrates, amphibians, and over 13 threatened, endangered, and sensitive species of plants and wildlife. Equally important were their amphibians. Oh wait, hold on. Over 150 species of birds, including 19 species of waterfowl and 22 species of shorebirds, rely on the wetlands for habitat, as do the amphibians. Errors that happened during my project: methods on data collection. In 2011 and 2012, they only took 1 sample from each of the playas from the middle of the playa. In 2013, we started taking 8 different samples from around the playa while doing our macro surveys. So trying to compare their data to ours, our 2011 and 12 to 2013 was really hard. Recording from spring and fall, it varied because some of the playas were drying between that time, and not all was recorded for both 11 and 12. Elements changed. In 2011, some elements were present that weren't in 2012, and vice versa. The BOR's database went down at the beginning of June when I was supposed to start my project, so I couldn't really start until the end of July until we figured out where all that data went. So results. Hold on a second. I was able to characterize it from a low to highs across 2 years and across 4 different playas. Where it was possible, I compared it to EPA standards and seawater concentration levels. Here is a table that I put together. If you look around, there is not much variability between any of them or clear trends. Some cases go from a very high to a very low. When looking at chloride, it's very present there, if you go across that. Referencing EPA standards, bromide had a high of 816 and a low of 3.85. Its EPA standard was 0.05, and its seawater average was 65. Our highest level is above seawater, and our lowest level is still above the EPA drinking water standards. So where we did see some sort of a trend starts in sodium. So hold on a second. There was a lack of data in every other element, so we couldn't really do any but sodium and total dissolved solids. So this graph shows a correlation for increasing evaporation levels, declining water levels, and concentrating minerals and salts. And following this element is total dissolved solids. So you can see here for both 2011 and playa 46, which is the first playa on here. They are the same, however, in the fall it skyrocketed. With declining water levels, it appears that TDS increases. It also is very apparent in playa 16 as well. So what this says, there's high levels in salt and saline. Predictions were made by contractors that came to do soil samples that said that there was a lot of salt and tried to show how the layering went and where and when it moved. There is seasonal variability and high variability, and EPA standards are both above and below wetlands water quality. To put it into perspective for people, the water quality on the Blanca wetlands, it is very good for flourishing macroinvertebrates, but when it comes to dairy cattle, they can only tolerate our lowest limits. And when it comes to poultry, they can't tolerate our limits at all. So any chickens type things, they'll be gone right away. They can't handle it whatsoever. So BLM's applying it to the future. BLM understands that their sample sizes are much smaller than what their perception of them were. When it comes to collecting the data, more than a few years needs to be collected in order to make better inferences. And with the ability to manage the water freshness and quality of each of the basins, BLM is able to better understand and target species to meet wildlife species and habitat objectives. And that is my project.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Pinedo-Escobedo. I'm a senior here at Adams, getting my Bachelor's of Science in chemistry. This summer I worked with the BLM as a renewable energy intern, but my actual project was done with Bureau of Reclamation, with their labs out here in eastern Alamosa with head chemist Susan Storm. So the Bureau of Land Management doesn't actually employ any chemists or have any labs here in the San Luis Valley, which is where I did my actual project with the Bureau of Reclamation. The samples I was doing it on, however, was the Blanca wetland samples, and like she mentioned, they're really high in sodium, and my goal was to find an alternative method to analyze the ammonia, and that is exactly what I did. This is a picture of one of the playas, and if you can see all this white layer at the bottom, those are salt deposits in the earth. So these places are really, really saturated with sodium. And the BLM has the Bureau of Reclamation analyze these samples. And before my project, they had no other method of being able to analyze ammonia in the wetland samples. So head chemist Susan Storm uses this instrument, it's ICP MS, or inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer, and she uses that to analyze for elements, metals, and other compounds that are dissolved in water. However, the sodium levels are so high in these samples that the sodium peak overshadows the ammonium peak, so it's undetectable. And the reason it's undetectable is they boot at pretty similar the Blanca wetlands had been lower, then that instrument would be able to detect the concentration down to parts per billion, but it doesn't. And so my goal was to find an alternative method that would be able to eliminate the sodium problem, and you would be able to do it on a large number of samples with cost and time efficiency. And I started looking, but I didn't start from scratch. I first looked at the National Environmental Methods Inventory website, and also looked at the standard methods for examination of waters and wastewaters. And I was able to come up with 4 methods. Of these 4, I started digging deeper into each one of them to see which one would be best for my project. The first one I looked at was, this is an ammonia selective electrode, and it works similar to a pH meter where it reads at activity, and you can, under standard conditions, this will give you the concentration of the ammonia in the water. However, upon further reading, I found out that if high levels of cations that are present in the water, it will not read accurately, which was exactly the problem. So, moving on. Another method is titration. The only issue with this thing is that you have to distill your samples individually before you can analyze them in order to remove matrix interference. And so doing a large number of different samples would make it very costly and time consuming to be able to do all those. So that method got tossed out. This next method is called Nestlerization. This, you form a color complex with the ammonia, and then you read this color change using a UV spectrometer. And this would have been the method of choice if not for the use of mercuric iodide, which is that compound right there. It's a really toxic chemical where one exposure can be fatal since it attacks the central nervous system and the respiratory system. This method, however, was pretty similar to the one I did end up using. The method I decided to go with is called 4500 NH3F10A method. And it's similar to the Nestlerization where you form a color complex with the actual ammonia, and you can read that color change using a UV spectrometer. The instrument I used was a Perkin-Elmer 35 lambda UV spectrometer at a wavelength of 640 nanometers. And the only downside to this method, however, is you do have to use 2 toxic compounds, phenol and sodium nitroxide dihydrate. But this method better lends itself to me reducing the volumes of those things, so I can reduce the chance of exposure. In the standard method, it calls out for 5 milliliters of sample. In my method, I was only going to use 1 milliliter, so I was able to cut everything down by a factor of 5. Before I did any actual work, we did a detailed procedure on all the steps and all the volumes of everything. Susan mentored me on this. She showed me how a lot of pre-lab work reduces errors and maximizes safety when you're doing the actual lab experiment. And for example, I had to make 3 reagent solutions which I would add to my sample. One of them was an oxidizing agent, which had to be prepared daily. My phenol solution, which had to be prepared weekly, and my sodium nitroxide solution, which had to be prepared monthly. And all of those steps and those time, expiration dates are all labeled in my actual procedure, as well as my tables for dilutions and everything before I got into the actual lab. Like any other experiment, I read my MSDS sheets before I ever signed the chemicals, so I knew of all the hazards that I was dealing with before I ever, touched any of them. But this wasn't the only safety group we went through. Me and her developed a method of safety for this specific experiment. All toxic chemicals were to be made and used in the hood there in the back. The personal protective equipment such as lab coats would be washed daily. Goggles were always on. Stuff such as gloves, chem wipes, pipette tips, and everything that was disposable had its own trash receptacle. Any glassware we used that day we would wash after we were done using it so it would be clean, not just on around. So the mixing of the actual solution was pretty simple. I would make my 3 reagent solutions. I would mix it with my sample, and then after letting it develop for an hour, the color would be stable for 24 hours. method that did not talk about though was creating a set of standards, or a range anyway. And I decided a range from 1 part per million to 20 parts per million would be adequate for what I was doing. And as you can see, my range didn't come out very linear, but from 0 to 5 parts per million, it was more or less linear. And after testing a lot of my samples, I found out that most of them were under 1 part per million. So I went ahead and redid my calibration curve with my new standards, and I was able to get a much better correlation coefficient of 0.9994. I was pretty proud of my value, and but more importantly, this allowed me, to analyze my samples with more confidence. And that's it right there for my concentration. But this wasn't the only thing I did. I created blanks and quality control samples to run before and during my sample analysis. So I would catch an instrument drift or anything that might have happened during actual analysis. And all of my quality control standards were within a given tolerance, and the blanks all kept reading 0, so it showed that this method was precise and accurate for the application I was doing. In order to keep things as uniform as possible, I used those vials, which were standardized. So I made all my standards, my samples, my QCs, and blanks, all in these. And I also likely provided an extra part of transportation safety, because it had locking lids, and I could carry them in the test tube rack. Here's just a close-up of those same vials, and if you notice, they're all clear right now, and they're on the counter. There's only water and ammonia in there, so there's nothing toxic in there yet, extremely toxic, and they're all clearly labeled as to what they are. This is a picture of them in the hood after I've added my oxidizing agent and the sodium nitric oxide. In order to minimize exposure, I would add my oxidizing agent to everything, and then once I was done with that, I would do the sodium nitric oxide, and I would switch pipette tips after every injection, and after I was done injecting the solution to all my samples, I would go ahead and switch out gloves and then follow the same method for my phenol solution. And so this is these are my standards from 1 part per million to 20 parts per million after they've been allowed to develop for an hour. And from here, I would carry them in that rack to a secondary hood, and from that hood, I would transfer them to a cuvette, and from the cuvette, I would do my analysis. For each cuvette, I had enough solution to be able to rinse it out once and then refill that same cuvette with my sample to be able to get the best accurate reading. And all my cuvettes were brand new out of the box, so I didn't matching them was not part of this experiment. This part was probably the part I was most uncomfortable with, because this instrument only holds 1 reference slot and 1 sample slot, so that meant I had to carry each individual cuvette to and from the hood with my sample. But I used gloves, I used caps, and I was patient, and I didn't have any drops or spills, so it went pretty well. And after I was done analyzing everything, I would go ahead and clean up and save my data. There was one time where I did my experiment, I ran my standards, got my QCs, and I had my data up on the computer. And nobody else was going to use this computer for the day, so I thought it'd be safe to just leave it running. I came back a few hours later, moved the mouse, and I saw my data. I clicked on one of the points, and the system crashed. So I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to my data. And so lesson learned. This was that secondary hood I was mentioning. From here, after I was done with everything, I would rinse out all my vials with DI to ensure that there was the minimum amount of reagent left over, and dispose of them all in a labeled plastic bag. And this was all of the waste I created from my total experiment. It's very pretty, but it's completely toxic. And this project was pretty cool. It allowed me to test and optimize something that turned out to be really useful for the labs. Now they can use my method. I'd just like to give thanks to the people who helped me do this project.
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you guys for coming again. My name is John Whitinger. I'm going to tell you about the focus of my internship this summer at the BLM, which was to create a new spring assessment form utilizing GIS. So what is GIS? GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. There are a lot of different GIS software programs out there, but basically anything that calls itself a geographic information system should be capable of creating and designing maps, storing georeferenced data, and analyzing that georeferenced data. GIS is used in just about anything you can think of. In 2014, Esri listed over 60 applications for GIS, which included business, construction, education, utilities, and transportation. A quick example maybe of how GIS can be used in, let's say, education. Here's a map. You can't really see it very well, but it depicts school districts in Houston, and the different shades of blue are poverty percentages for kids living in those areas. So here's a way to spatially analyze and answer questions about what percentage of students in each school district are living in poverty. And that's just one example. But how does the BLM utilize GIS? The BLM utilizes GIS for collecting, analyzing, and storing data. The geologists, the archaeologists, the biologists, all the ologies, and the Parks and Rec team at the BLM all use this GIS system as a way of collecting, analyzing, and storing data. The way I used it during my internship a lot of the time was creating project maps. Project maps are quick maps that help people or help employees that are working in the field identify where they're at. So these maps, a lot of the times they had me create like 15 minutes before they left, and they wanted to know the jurisdiction of the land they were on. So whether they're on BLM land, National Forest Service land, private land, and then what the land use designation for that land was, whether it was a grazing allotment or a park, just pertinent information for where they were going to be working in the field that day. Also, the BLM it manages a lot of public land. So creating maps for the public so that they can utilize their land is important. And here's what one of those maps looks like. Hopefully everybody's kind of familiar with what the trail maps created by the BLM look like. One of the natural resources that the BLM manages are springs. These springs are used for water sources for grazing cattle on these grazing allotments, but they're also an important natural resource. They naturally form wetlands such as the Blanca wetlands, and these wetlands are important for wildlife, for birds, nesting birds, migrating birds. The elk use the Blanca wetlands as a foraging area and a refuge. Recreationally, the Blanca wetlands are a great place to fish, to mountain bike, seasonally hunt. But more importantly, and kind of on a global scale, why these wetlands are important is because they act as a natural carbon sink. Wetlands, the vegetation in wetlands gets trapped under the water, and in these highly saline soils, as we saw in the previous presentations, and it doesn't allow them to decompose and release carbon into the atmosphere, contributing to greenhouse gases and global warming. So springs create wetlands, wetlands are carbon sinks, springs are important. And this is what one of those, one of these watering holes for cattle look like. They squirt a little bit of water out. Here's how data was originally collected for these springs. It was a paper field form created by the hydrologists at the BLM, and it served as we're kind of looking through some of these completed forms. We see issues with handwriting. I don't know about you, but I can't read a lot of this cursive and these cross-out marks. We got the neatness of these data forms. We got redding, bluing, places where things have been corrected. Some of them got wet. There's a lot of problems with having a paper field form.
Another one is that the process they were using to store this data on a computer was that somebody, some poor seasonal, would have to sit down with all these paper field forms and record all the data on them in a Word document on the computer. This wastes hours. This is a lot of time spent trying to decipher all of these values and putting them into a Word document. And also, when you're transcribing data like this, it's subject to a lot of human error. I don't know about you, but spending hours trying to look at these field forms and putting them into a computer would probably mess up a lot. So that leads me to my project. My project was to create a digital field form to replace this paper field form and that Word document, which was the previous data storage system for the spring data. And we were going to, through these three objectives, we accomplished the creation of our digital field form. So objective one, create a digital field form that can be used to collect spring data on a Trimble unit using either TerraSync or ArcPad. TerraSync and ArcPad are two different GIS software systems, and a Trimble, really quick, is a handheld computer with GPS capabilities that can easily georeference data. They're water resistant, they can use either software system, and they basically just make field collection or collection of field data a lot easier. Objective two, we wanted to standardize the data entry values and remove all the open entry text fields in the previous form. Backtrack real quick here. So we have these open entry text fields, or open entry data fields, which, depending on the observer and their experience level, those values could change a lot depending on who was recording that data that day, because it was just a blank field. We weren't given any choices. So there was a lot of observer bias in these fields, which we wanted to get rid of. And lastly, objective three, we wanted to create a geodatabase that could collect and store all the spring data that was collected in both TerraSync and ArcMap GIS platforms. So some terminology to help all of us who aren't GIS professionals get through the methods here. TerraSync is linked with data dictionary file. A data dictionary file ultimately becomes the field form within TerraSync. ArcMap is intimately related with the geodatabase, and the geodatabase ultimately becomes our field form in the ArcMap platform. A data category is something like flow, and a value for a data category like flow might be 50 to 12.5 CFS. So here's our methods. Everything in red has to deal with the TerraSync and data dictionary side of this project, and everything in green has to do with the ArcMap and geodatabase side of this project. So we start out with our field form here. It was the template for creating these new digital field forms in ArcMap and TerraSync. First, to create the field form for TerraSync, we had to create a feature type. A feature type is basically a point line or a polygon, and it's the shape of the georeferenced data that we'll be collecting. So in our case, we're collecting spring data, so we wanted to use, or we're collecting spring source data, so we used a point feature. And here's what it looks like in a data dictionary editor when you're trying to create that. Next, we needed to add data categories to our feature type. So, and data categories in TerraSync are called attributes. Basically, there are a lot of different attributes that you can add, a lot of different types of attributes. You have text attributes, which hold text data, or text values. Numeric attributes hold numeric data. And then we have these pick list and checkbox attributes. A pick list is basically a drop-down menu, and a checkbox is like a yes or no checkbox. And this is really how we standardize our values, was through these two types of attributes. Here specifically, we have the attribute Oriocrene, which is a spring type, and we made this into a yes no checkbox. And here are actually all the values that we included, plus a lot more for that spring type, or that spring point. So for those drop-down menus and those yes no checkboxes, we had to add values to those data categories and those attributes. So that came in the form of yes no checkboxes or specified values for those drop-down menus. After giving those attributes, their standardized data, or their standardized values. We have a finished data dictionary file, which was ultimately our field form for the TerraSync format. And here's what it looks like in the data dictionary editor when it was all done. We use that finished data dictionary file as a template for creating our geodatabase. And the geodatabase recognized the data categories from the data dictionary file and created its own data categories, which is called feature classes. So here are all the attributes or data categories that were carried over from the data dictionary file. The thing that it didn't recognize when using it as a template was those values that we added to each attribute. So we had to manually go back in and add those values for the checkboxes and the drop-down menus again in ArcMap, in ArcCatalog. And this is what it looks like. Here's using ArcCatalog and we're adding the domains. The geodatabase doesn't have the same checkbox capability that ArcMap and the data dictionary file had. So in this case, for all the checkboxes that were in the data dictionary file, they were converted into yes, no drop-down menus in the geodatabase, but they function basically the same way. And after that, we had our finished geodatabase, which was our field form for the ArcMap platform and the storage system for all of our data. And this is what it looks like. I know that was a lot to get through. I'm sorry. But here's one of the drop-down menus, what they look like in the geodatabase. And normalized values for these drop-down menus. So our results. I successfully created both of these digital field forms. Here on the in this yellow Trimble unit, we have the field form for the TerraSync platform, and over here we have the geodatabase, which was the field form in ArcMap. And so what this did for us was it corrected those problems that we identified with the paper field form. These digital field forms are obviously, we don't have any problems with legibility. Everything's typed. So that goes away. They're neat. The field form is always going to have this very neat format instead of cross-outs with red and blue and black ink. And lastly, because these Trimble units are weather resistant, we don't have to worry about our data getting screwed up due to or lost due to field conditions. So, objective 2, we ended up so we standardized all those drop-down menus and those yes no checkboxes, which really the reason that we had to standardize these is because the BLM hires a lot of seasonal employees. These seasonal employees aren't experts in spring attribute identification. So having open entry text fields is kind of scary for somebody who's never looked at a spring. These drop-down menus and checkboxes make it kind of like a multiple choice format. Choose the attributes that best apply to each spring instead of having to identify them on your own. And that was the power behind having these. And also, these standardized values later make data queryable once we get to the geodatabase, and I'll explain that in a second. So the geodatabase, this solved a lot of the problems with the hours of data that needed to be digitized from the paper forms. So before, somebody sat, they took a field form, and they digitized all the data into a Word document. Now, you plug it into your Trimble unit, you upload the data into your geodatabase, and you're done. Getting back to those standardized values, the reason they're so powerful, they allow data to be queryable in a geodatabase. And what a query is I can ask the geodatabase a question about the data, and it will give me all the springs that apply to that question. So let's say I want to know all of the fields, or all of the springs that have a foot slope that's at 45 degrees. I ask the geodatabase that question, it spits out all the springs that have that attribute. As compared to if you had this Word document, you got to rifle through every single Word document and find all that apply. So that's really the power of having the standardized values in a geodatabase. Why did we have to have an ArcMap and a TerraSync digital form? Really, again, it falls down to seasonal workers and employee preference. The BLM hires a lot of these temporary workers to gather all this data, and therefore having the field form in 2 different software platforms made it easier when it came to hiring each seasonal. So it didn't matter whether they had experience in ArcMap or TerraSync, they could collect the data either way. Why is this important? The BLM is moving towards data collection on a national level. A lot of the data that the BLM collects gets pushed up to the NOC, which is the National Operations Center, and the National Operations Center acts as the centralized location for all BLM data. How does my digital field form relate to this? The idea is that if everybody collected data in a digital format using these digital forms, and everybody used the same digital form with the same normalized values, that would make analyzing data collected on a national level a lot easier. These digital formats can easily be uploaded into a geodatabase and sent right to the NOC without having anybody spend hours putting it into a Word document, collecting Word documents, sending them in an email. It makes the whole process of transferring data to one location a lot easier. Also, if everybody used the same digital format and had standardized values, the people at the NOC wouldn't have to bang their heads against the table trying to take all the different Word documents and put them into the same geodatabase. So that's the